She arrived trembling. Makeup smudged, wrist bruised, voice barely a whisper. "I need a place to hide," she said. "He's coming for me." The man behind the marble desk didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his gaze was cold, calculating. "People usually come here for money," the Mafia Boss said. "Not mercy." And yet, for reasons he couldn't explain, he told her to stay. The rain had been falling for hours, washing the city's sins down the gutters. Inside the Vespero lounge, Amara wiped the last table, eyes flicking to the clock above the bar. Midnight. Closing time. Her bruises were almost gone now, at least the ones on her skin. The rest lived in the pauses between her breaths. She'd spent 2 weeks pretending her husband wasn't still watching her from across the street in his rusted sedan. When the door slammed open, she dropped the glass in her hand. It wasn't him. It was Christian Hayes, the man who owned the building, the block, and half the men in the city who feared sunlight. He was never supposed to be here this late. He never came twice to the same place unless something, or someone, intrigued him. "You close early now?" he asked, his voice like static through velvet. Amara swallowed. "Just cleaning up." "Then let me ask you something," he said, stepping closer, eyes catching the faint reflection of her wrist. "Who hurt you?" She froze. "It's nothing." He smiled, but not kindly. "Nothing doesn't bleed." Before she could answer, headlights flashed through the window. A car idling too long by the curb. Her body went rigid. "Stay still," Hayes murmured, pulling the curtains shut with one hand and his gun from his coat with the other. When he looked back, she was shaking. "That him?" She nodded once. He holstered the weapon, voice calm but final. "You have 2 choices, Waitress. You go back to that car, or you walk upstairs and never look behind you again." Her pulse hammered. "You don't even know me." He poured himself a drink. "I don't need to. Fear introduces people faster than names." When she didn't move, he set down the glass and looked straight at her. "Decision time." Amara turned toward the staircase, the one that led to the upper suites she'd only ever cleaned. Each step felt heavier than the last. Behind her, the storm grew louder. Somewhere in that sound, she thought she heard her husband shouting her name, but the door never opened. Hayes picked up his phone, dialed a number, and said quietly, "No one follows her home. Ever again." For the first time in years, she slept without the sound of fists on a door. Morning light crawled through the curtains like a secret. For the first time in months, Amara woke without flinching at the sound of footsteps. Silk sheets, high ceiling, a chandelier too delicate for someone like her, none of it felt real. She sat up slowly. The bruises on her arm were yellow now, fading, but the memory of her husband's hands hadn't faded at all. A soft knock, then a woman's voice. "Breakfast is ready, ma'am." Amara froze. Ma'am. No one had called her that before. She opened the door to find a maid with silver hair and quiet eyes. "I'm Livia," the woman said. "Mr. Hayes asked me to make sure you eat." "He asked?" Livia nodded once. "He doesn't like guests who disappear." Downstairs, the mansion was sunlight and silence. Marble floors, framed oil paintings, and guards pretending not to look. At the far end of the dining hall sat Christian Hayes, reading a newspaper, coffee untouched. He didn't greet her when she entered. He just turned a page. "Sit," he said finally. Amara obeyed, keeping her eyes on the plate. Croissants, fruit, eggs that tasted like nothing. After a long silence, he asked, "Do you know how many people ask me for help each week?" She shook her head. 17. Usually men begging for money, or women begging for forgiveness. He folded the newspaper. "You're the first who begged to disappear." Her voice was small. "So you're helping me out of charity?" He smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. "Nothing I do is charity." He pushed a small black phone across the table. "No calls, no messages. This is how my people will contact you. You'll stay here until I say otherwise." "And if my husband finds me?" Hayes leaned back in his chair. "He won't." Something in his tone made her believe it. Still, she asked, "Why are you doing this?" He stood, buttoning his jacket. "Because the men who break women think they can touch anything they want. I collect debts differently." Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her alone with the quiet hum of a house too big for one conscience. Days passed. Every hallway smelled of money and danger. Guards nodded when she walked by, like they already knew her story. But one afternoon, in the library, she found something that wasn't supposed to be there. An open file with her photograph clipped to the first page, her full name, her address, her husband's criminal record, and, at the bottom, a single note written in Hayes's hand. Debt collected soon. Her stomach turned. Had she traded one cage for another? As thunder rolled outside, Amara closed the file, and for the first time since arriving she realized this house wasn't protection. It was preparation. Night in the Hayes mansion was a strange kind of quiet, too heavy to sleep through, too perfect to trust. Somewhere beyond the glass walls, thunder crawled over the sea. Amara wandered the corridor barefoot, the hem of her borrowed silk gown brushing marble like a whisper. Every step echoed. The guards were gone. The house breathed differently. She found him in the study, sleeves rolled, eyes fixed on an old chessboard. The pieces weren't wood. They were carved from bullets and bone. "You move like a thief," he said without looking up. "I was trying not to wake the king," she replied. He smirked. "There's no king here, only players who forget the rules." On the desk behind him lay another file. This one bore her husband's name, Marcus Lane, in neat, unfeeling letters. "Why is his file here?" she asked. "Because debt doesn't vanish just because someone runs," Hayes said. "He borrowed money from my partners. Then he started using my network to hide his own crimes." Her pulse climbed. "You're saying he worked for you?" "Briefly, until he thought he could steal from me and blame someone else." Amara shook her head. "So, this is revenge?" Hayes finally looked at her. "Revenge is personal. This is balance." He slid the folder toward her. "You should know what kind of man you begged me to protect you from." Inside were photos. Grainy security shots of Marcus meeting men in alleys, exchanging envelopes, laughing over a bruised figure bound to a chair. One of the dates matched the night she'd been hospitalized. Her throat closed. "You kept this from me. You weren't ready." She slammed the file shut. "You're no savior, Mr. Hayes. You just needed another reason to feel righteous." He stood, slowly. "Maybe. But tell me, if I hand him over to the police, do you think they'll keep him alive long enough to testify?" The words hit harder than the storm outside. He stepped closer, voice lowering. "Or do you want to decide what happens to him yourself?" Amara stared at him, torn between the instinct to run and the ache to end the nightmare for good. "I don't want blood," she whispered. "I just want it to stop." Hayes's jaw tightened. "Then stop pretending peace is something you get without paying for it." He walked to the window, city lights flickering against his reflection. When a man beats a woman, he doesn't fear consequences. He fears silence, the moment no one answers his calls anymore. He turned back to her. Tomorrow, his silence begins. That night, Amara couldn't sleep. She kept replaying his words, wondering if salvation and punishment were just different words for the same thing. Somewhere beyond the mansion gates, a car engine started, and by dawn, Marcus Lane would no longer be a man the city could find. The rain stopped by morning, but the house still smelled like it, steel, smoke, and something faintly metallic. Amara woke to silence that didn't feel safe. She stepped into the hallway. Every door was closed except one, the study. Inside, the chessboard from last night was gone. Only a single pawn remained on the desk, lying on its side beside an envelope. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the note. Debt settled. Don't ask how. The air left her chest. She knew what that meant. Downstairs, 2 men in suits whispered near the foyer. When they saw her, they straightened instantly. "Mr. Hayes is waiting in the greenhouse," one said. The path outside was still wet. She followed it to a glass structure glowing gold under the morning light. Rows of orchids filled the air with sweetness that didn't match the dread in her stomach. Hayes stood near the center, jacket off, trimming the stem of a white flower. When he looked up, his expression was unreadable. "You didn't have to do it," she said quietly. He placed the scissors down. "Do what?" "Don't," she whispered. "Please don't lie to me." He sighed. "You think I killed him?" "You said his silence would begin today." He stepped closer, the soft crunch of gravel beneath his shoes echoing like thunder. "I said silence. I didn't say death." "Then where is he?" Hayes's eyes hardened. "Somewhere he can't touch you again." "That's not an answer." He moved another step closer until their reflections met in the glass wall. "Neither is a thank you." She flinched. "You call this saving me?" "I call it ending a cycle." Her voice broke. "You ended it your way, not mine." The orchids trembled as a gust of wind pressed against the glass. Hayes's jaw tightened. If I'd left him alive, he would have crawled back. Men like him don't stop. They pause. Amara's eyes burned. "So you decided what my closure should look like?" He looked away. Someone had to. She stared at him. This man who had given her roof, protection, and now something she'd never asked for. Irreversible freedom. Freedom wrapped in guilt. "I didn't want him dead," she whispered. Hayes turned, meeting her eyes again. "And I didn't want to care. Yet here we are." For a moment, neither spoke. The sound of water dripping from the ceiling filled the space between them. Finally, he reached into his coat and handed her a small flash drive. "Everything he stole, every name he sold, it's all here. Do whatever you want with it. Burn it, bury it, or use it to start over." She hesitated, then took it. Their hands brushed for a second, warmth cutting through the cold. "I can't stay here," she said. He nodded once. "I know." As she walked away, the reflection in the glass showed him standing still, surrounded by perfect flowers rooted in dirt, the only kind of beauty he understood. By afternoon, the storm had cleared completely. The sky was a flat, merciless blue, too clean for the kind of things that had happened beneath it. Amara packed the few clothes she had. The flash drive sat at the top of her bag, heavier than it should have been. Livia helped her at the door, hands folded neatly in front of her apron. "Mr. Hayes said you'd want to leave quietly," she murmured. "I've had enough noise for a lifetime," Amara replied. The maid smiled faintly, her eyes soft with something that looked like pity. "If he calls, answer. It's easier that way." Amara frowned. Why would he call? Livia's expression didn't change. "He always calls." The car waiting outside was black and spotless, the same one that had brought her here weeks ago. But this time, there was no guard, no escort. Just the driver, silent, eyes fixed forward. The ride through the city was too familiar. The neon signs, the diner she used to work at, the cracked bus stop she'd stood under during rain. It all looked smaller now, as if she'd grown while the world stayed the same. She told the driver to stop 2 blocks from her old apartment. He didn't question it, just nodded and handed her an envelope before she got out. Inside was cash, a lot of it, and a note. "You bought your silence. Now spend it wisely." C.H. She folded the note, slipped it into her coat pocket, and walked away. The apartment door still had her name on it. The walls smelled like bleach and loneliness. She sat on the floor beside the window and looked at her reflection in the glass. No bruises, no tears, just a woman who finally belonged to no one. For the first time, she thought she could live with that. She found work at a small bakery on the edge of town, far from the marble and gold. Every morning, she dusted powdered sugar over pastries, smiling at customers who didn't know her name. Sometimes she forgot to look over her shoulder. Sometimes. But peace, she learned, is fragile. 3 weeks later, as she locked up the bakery, she noticed a single white orchid left on the counter, its stem wrapped in a folded napkin. No note this time. No signature. Just a symbol. She stood there for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Then she picked up the flower, ran her thumb across its petals, and whispered, "Still watching, aren't you?" Outside, a car engine idled in the dark, unseen. And for a fleeting second she could have sworn she saw the faintest reflection of a man's silhouette in the glass door. Then nothing. The bakery slept behind her. Only the neon "Open" sign still flickering in the window reminded Amara that daylight would come again. But she wasn't waiting for morning. The flash drive had waited long enough. 3 weeks of pretending it was just another secret at the bottom of her drawer. 3 weeks of ignoring the voice that whispered every time she touched it, "He gave you the truth. Now, what will you do with it?" Tonight, she wanted the answer. She borrowed an old laptop from the shop's office and sat by the window. The drive clicked into place with a tiny sound that felt too loud. Then the screen lit up. Files. Dozens. Shipping manifests. Bank accounts. Lists of politicians and officers, all under the same coded mark she'd seen in Hayes's study. A silver crown. At first she scrolled, numb. Then she saw something that stopped her breathing. One of the account names was hers. Brooks & Sons Catering. Owner Amara. Lane. A fake business. Her name used to launder the same money that had built Hayes's empire. Her stomach twisted. She hadn't escaped. She'd been written into the walls of his world. The knock on the door was soft, polite, terrifying. She turned. Christian Hayes stood in the hallway, coat dark from rain, eyes unreadable. "I told you you'd spend it wisely," he said, nodding toward the drive. "How long?" she asked, voice trembling. "How long have you been using my name?" "Since the night you asked me to protect you," he replied. "Protection requires paper trails." "That's not protection. That's ownership." He stepped inside, closing the door gently. "I kept you alive, Amara. The moment your husband's people came looking, you were untouchable. They thought you belonged to me." She shook her head. "You turned me into proof of your power." His tone stayed calm. "And you're still here to argue about it. Isn't that worth something?" She lifted the flash drive. "You built everything on blood and lies. But this has every name, every payment. If I release it," he interrupted softly, "you'll burn us both. I'm not afraid anymore." For the first time, his voice cracked. "Then you're a fool." A car passed outside, light sweeping across their faces. He looked older suddenly, tired. "I wanted you safe. That's the only truth left in this mess." Amara met his gaze. "Then let me choose what safe means." She walked to the counter, dropped the flash drive on a metal tray, and lit a match. Flame kissed plastic, then devoured it whole. Neither of them moved. Smoke curled between them like a curtain slowly closing. When it was done, she whispered, "Now we're both free." Hayes watched the last ember die. "You really think freedom looks like this?" "No," she said quietly, "but it finally feels like it." He nodded once, turned toward the door, and vanished into the rain. Amara locked it behind him, slid to the floor, and exhaled until her lungs hurt. Outside, the storm began again, but this time it sounded like applause.